Hello, welcome back to the Space School Look, otherwise known as PPSW, your favorite handle place direct with another Star Wars story. Today we'll discover what would have happened had Darth Sidious lost to Yoda during Revenge of the Sith. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else a part of the Pente Patrol team. Want a chance to win in our next giveaway? Watch to the end of the video and I'll tell you exactly how you can win a free lightsaber. Our story begins below the main Senate chambers. The Dark Lord of the Sith, Chief Palpatine's office, was down here. It used to be the Chancellor's office until it was retrofitted into the Emperor's office when the Galactic Republic was reformed into the Galactic Empire. That was only a few hours beforehand. Currently, Sidious was sitting in this little underground office with Masa as they planned out the first steps of Imperial rule. Sidious was instructing Masa on everything he wanted done in the first few days to the first few years. There was going to be a celebration of the downfall of the Jedi. There would be a large-scale hunt for the Jedi as a means to end their reign. Sidious was so enthralled with his new empire that he couldn't even hide his eagerness. His excitement was dumbfounded. When he heard the sound of a small cane walk into the room he was currently in, he was surprised. Sidious turned over and stared into the eyes of the little green Jedi Grand Master Yoda. The Jedi Master wasn't here to play around, as he flickered his hand up and the two royal guards next to him slammed their heads into the walls and were immediately knocked out as they fell to the floor. Sidious's excitement faded into a frown as he looked down at Yoda. The two of them exchanged some words as Yoda ensured that Sidious knew that he wasn't backing down from this engagement. Yoda did offer Masa a means to escape with his life, so Sidious allowed his aide to leave the room. Sidious was going to kill Yoda as he raised his hands to shoot lightning at the Grand Master. Yoda was ready as he took in the lightning into his hands. Yoda looked back at Sidious and steadied himself and spread out his arms. Yoda wasn't defeated. He was poised to right the wrongs of his past. Yoda had failed the Jedi Order by not defending them. He allowed Windu to be arrogant and ignorant, and his entire order paid the price for it. The past couldn't be fixed, and Yoda came to terms with that. Yoda had faith in Obi-Wan to beat Anakin, and all that needed to be done was that he defeat Sidious. Sure, the Sith Lord was powerful, but Yoda right now was in a focused mind, ready to do what needed to be done. If Yoda wasn't in this mindset, he wouldn't have seen the lightning come his way. He wouldn't have noticed how ready to kill Sidious was. Yoda wasn't going to play games with Sidious, as he motioned his hands towards his lightsaber, waiting to see what Sidious would make as a move. The Dark Lord watched Yoda, and each movement he made. It was almost as if Sidious was afraid of this duel. Had Sidious successfully hit Yoda, there was a good chance that he could make an escape. Sidious had come so close to defeat against Windu. If the Master of the Order could beat him, then surely Yoda could. There was also a difference about Yoda. He wasn't angry. Sure, Yoda was certainly hurt by the events of the last several hours, but having to find all the dead Jedi inside of the Jedi Temple, that had hurt. But Yoda didn't let it get to him. He knew what he had to do. He knew what needed to be done. There was so much turmoil that awaited at the other side of this fight, but Yoda, in this moment, knew he had to win this fight and defeat Sidious. Yoda had no fear about Skywalker. Kenobi had been able to best Skywalker in spars in the last several years, because every time Skywalker got more powerful, he got more cocky. Kenobi would put him in his place after a spar, and from there Skywalker would humble himself until he repeated the same process over again. Yoda had no reason to believe that this same process would happen again. Yoda trusted Obi-Wan to do what needed to be done. From here, though, Yoda needed to hold up his side of the bargain and stop the Sith Lord from beating him and returning to power. As long as Yoda won this duel, the Jedi had a chance at redemption. Yoda knew he couldn't handle another loss, but he wasn't here to lose. His mindset was only on victory. Yoda knew that if he thought of failure, then failure would find him. Yoda knew that if he allowed feelings of fear into his mind and heart, then he would surely be a disappointment to the order he vowed to protect. Yoda stood, adjacent from Sidious. The Dark Lord had been through quite a bit in the last 24 hours, and while most of it was victory, Sidious did have a bit to fear. He knew that Lord Vader could be in danger. Not that he was currently in danger, but he did know that Lord Vader was currently on Mustafar, engaging a Jedi Master. Which one? He was unaware of at the moment. Sidious's fear of his apprentice failing was his inability to trust that Anakin could take on a High Council member. Sure, the defeat of Mace Windu, but that wasn't a foe that was paying attention to him. Sidious wasn't entirely sure if Vader could be able to stand up to Plo Koon, Shak Ti, or Coleman Kajak. Sidious believed that Vader would have no issue in besting Obi-Wan, but that was because Sidious always doubted Obi-Wan, and believed he was never worthy of a position on the High Council. Maybe it was a stinginess from Obi-Wan taking Maul from him so early into his career as a Sith Lord, or maybe it was overall disgust at Kenobi. Regardless, Sidious turned his attention back towards Yoda. Sidious ignited his lightsaber and told Yoda that Lord Vader would be more powerful than either of them. Yoda was quick to rebuttal as he told Sidious that his faith in his new apprentice was misplaced, just like Sidious's loyalty to the dark side of the Force. Two lightsabers stared each other down. One emerged as an emerald green while the other was crimson, bleeding red. Sidious and Yoda lifted their blades as they began to face down one another. They poised themselves for an assault on the other, and then instantaneously they both leapt into the middle of the room. Their blades swung around and clashed. The blades grinded on one another as a screeching echoed across the room. Sidious looked at Yoda as the two of them leapt again and swung their blades around and met in time once again. Their blades interlocked as the Master of Darkness and the Master of Light looked into each other's souls. The two of them were just getting a feel for one another. When experienced duelists were getting ready to face down other experienced duelists, they took their time with each strike to get a feel for the other's style. Both Sidious and Yoda used the same style of combat, and both of them were extremely acrobatic in their styles. The two of them began to speed up their assaults as their blades bounced back off of each other's blade. The two of them speedily moved throughout the room, from side to side, leaping from each position they stood in. Grunting and screeching could be heard as the two older duelists continued to grind their blades against the other's blade. Sidious jumped down and swung his blade around his body as his blade met Yoda's. The two pushed each other's back. Yoda was hard to fight for a normally sized individual. Striking, parrying, and blocking was all off by several proportions. For Yoda, he had the natural advantage by being so short against such inexperienced duelists. This would cause Sidious to focus more on the Force and use more of his energy. If Yoda could push Sidious as hard as he could, there is a possibility that Yoda could break Sidious's will and beat him while he was weakened from the duel. Sidious and Yoda pushed back one another as the Jedi Master leapt off of Sidious's desk. The Dark Lord swung for Yoda, missing as he swung his blade around in his wrist, trying to block the movement of the Jedi Master. Sidious was furious. He was struggling here. Yoda was centuries older, and therefore his fighter game should be weak, but it wasn't. He was far more powerful than Sidious could have ever anticipated. The Dark Lord and the Jedi Grand Master toiled in the middle of the room as Yoda leapt over Sidious and landed on the Senate pod for the Emperor of the Galaxy. Sidious jumped up and followed Yoda into the pod as he and the Jedi Master clashed blades with one another. Sidious was vile and Yoda was remarkable. Their duel carried each of them on the spiral of doom as their lightsabers ignited the dimly lit Senate chambers. Sidious looked around as his pod leveled up slowly into the air as they were surrounded by hundreds of Senate pods. Yoda looked around and noticed, but he also saw that there was no sign of citizens. This took stress immediately off of his mind. Yoda knew that if there were citizens inside the Senate chambers, Sidious would have laid into them with lightning or the Force or something vile. Yoda had only one priority as he and Sidious clashed their blades with one another. Sidious and Yoda got engaged in a stiff interaction, where both of their blades yelled at one another as they slid back and forth onto the other. Sidious used the Force to get a pod to move out behind him as he leapt back, avoiding a nearly fatal blow by Yoda. The Dark Lord zoomed away as Yoda watched him avoid combat. Yoda knew that this was an overly positive move for him. It meant that Sidious was in fear of losing the battle, and he was avoiding conflict with Yoda to stay alive. Yoda had to play this right as he hopped up on top of the pod and looked across the room. He had to play this perfectly, or else he would fall into whatever trap Sidious was setting up for him. Yoda used the Force and used the true resolve of the Jedi Master as he sheathed his blade and watched Sidious cackle from a distance. Yoda looked down at the control pod behind him and flipped a lever as the entire group of pods from around the entire room disconnected and blindly began to hover around the room. Yoda smiled as he noticed each of the pods move around the massive chamber room aimlessly without direction to go. Some of them were moving, others were hovering. It was the perfect combination. Sidious didn't notice until his pod was tapped lightly by a freely roaming pod. Yoda looked around as he leapt from the main pod onto a harmlessly floating by one. When Sidious turned around to find Yoda, he couldn't find the Jedi Master, who seemingly disappeared into the sea of pods. Sidious felt a surge of fear as he began to scour the room looking for the Jedi Grand Master. He couldn't find Yoda as the massive pods floated around the room. Yoda spun one of the pods around and sent it flying towards Sidious' pod. Sidious didn't notice until the last second when he abandoned his pod and the two that he was on exploded behind him. Sidious crashed, landed on another pod that was floating around beneath him. The hooded Sith Lord looked up and searched the room again, his eyes focused as they ever could have been, when he heard the sound of footsteps landing. Sidious spun around as fast as he could and shot lightning at Yoda, who held his hands out instead of trying to grab his lightsaber. Yoda held his own as he pushed all the lightning back towards Sidious. The Sith Lord groaned out loud while he tried to push any advantage, but Yoda's calm and quiet demeanor only told the story of a focused Jedi Master preparing to snuff out the Sith forever. Sidious lost control of his power as the force between him and Yoda exploded, sending both Jedi Masters backwards. Yoda caught a hold of his grip, as Sidious did too. The two Master Force users used the Force to propel themselves forward. Sidious searched for his blade on his belt, but when he saw the blade being pulled away from him, he couldn't help but notice his greatest failure. Sidious tumbled forward as the Grand Master Yoda ignited his lightsaber into the face of Palpatine. The evil Sith Lord tumbled down to the ground as he lay dormant, with his eyes fixated on the ceiling. Yoda used the Force to throw the body of Sidious back into the main pod as he leapt over with Sidious. Yoda pressed a few of the buttons on the main control system as it took him and Palpatine back down into the Emperor's office, while also moving all the Senate pods back into their original locations. Yoda was victorious, but he hadn't felt victory yet. He still knew that Kenobi had to complete his mission. Until then, Yoda and Bail Organa would go across the galaxy to Pulis Masa, where the two Jedi Masters agreed to meet once their respective missions were finished. On the fiery world of Mustafar, Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan tore through the walls and rooms as their blades clashed against each other's. The battle on Mustafar had been very evenly matched. It was a battle of brothers. Both of them had each other's styles down completely. Anakin knew how Obi-Wan fought, but Obi-Wan really knew how Anakin fought. Obi-Wan was playing this as safe as he could. From the moment this duel started, he was on a heavy backpedal. Obi-Wan knew one thing about this fight. The most important thing about this fight is that he stayed patient. Anakin with new power would be fighting without patience. His eagerness to win would put his amazing offense into a tailspin that would eventually lead to defeat. Obi-Wan just needed to hold his own until that moment. Obi-Wan was doing a terrific job thus far. Anakin's speed and vicious behavior would have put any number of Jedi Masters in a coffin by this point. Obi-Wan wasn't able to feel the death of Sidious from across the galaxy, but Skywalker, who was deeply connected to Palpatine, could feel that something was wrong. What was it? He didn't know, but it was enough to distract him momentarily. Obi-Wan saw his opportunity to strike, but thought it was a wrong time to do so he stayed patient and steadied himself back, as he took a quick breather before being kicked in the face on the outside of the complex. To Obi-Wan's left, fires exploded, and a lava river flowed tirelessly. The interior of the complex was ripped to shreds. Kenobi was a little worried about what damaging the control stations could do to the mining facility, but with an angry Anakin Skywalker bearing down on him, he didn't have any time to think about what the control systems could do if they were shut down. Anakin and Obi-Wan fought heavily back and forth as Obi-Wan found himself steadying onto a small pipe that crossed over top of the lava river below. Was this a terrible idea? Most certainly, but it proved how insane Skywalker had become since becoming Vader. Their duel continued momentarily as they stood several meters above the lava river. Obi-Wan saw an opportunity to exit as he and Skywalker leapt off the side of the pipe and down onto the ground, where they found themselves on a larger walkway. The two of them clashed blades before Anakin punched Obi-Wan in the face. Obi-Wan spun around and, being the tough man he was, marched back up to Skywalker as the two of them met in a glorious brawl. Anakin and Obi-Wan smashed their blades together, and then the sirens of the complex sounded. A volcano right next to the complex exploded, and Obi-Wan and Anakin ducked for cover as lava landed everywhere surrounding them. Within a matter of moments, the two of them were falling down to the surface of the lava river below them. Obi-Wan and Anakin ran to scale the massive structure they were on. Their duel continued as the two of them fought each other over top of one another. Anakin swung up, trying to hit Obi-Wan, as the older Jedi Master avoided strikes at his legs. Kenobi, as he continued his ascent, noticed the lava river was coming to an end. He knew that Anakin wouldn't notice until he was off of the platform, and so he found a rope to swing from and went for it. There were several mining droids that hovered over the lava, and they would be perfect for him to spot a land on. After a quick couple drive-by swings, Kenobi found himself over the lava and standing on a small platform. He watched Anakin struggle to catch a grip before having the genius idea of running towards the lava as the structure toppled over. Anakin was able to get enough momentum to propel himself forward and into the air as he landed down on a droid and moved towards Kenobi. Obi-Wan couldn't believe it. He was actually getting sick of this. This duel needed to end because it was becoming too much for the Jedi Master to deal with. Obi-Wan and Anakin smacked their blades back and forth over top of the lava river as their heated exchange got faster and faster, stronger and stronger. Vader lunged over Kenobi as Obi-Wan swung, missing. He turned around and Vader was on his platform. The former master and apprentice dug their heels into the platform as they fought one another. Their blades moved faster than starfighters and their precision was greater than generations of duelists. Obi-Wan was holding it well, and Anakin was too, but each of them could admit that they were beginning to get tired. Obi-Wan saw an escape as he blasted Anakin with the blade and leaped backwards. Anakin swung forward after blocking Obi-Wan's strike. Obi-Wan landed at the top of the lava bank as he looked down at Anakin. Obi-Wan had the high ground, and it was over for Anakin. It really wasn't, but it was a deceptive move by Obi-Wan. He was using some reverse psychology to throw off Anakin. Obi-Wan knew how easily Anakin would bite the bait. But he tried one last time to give Anakin a chance at redeeming himself. He didn't want to do what he was about to do, and he gave Anakin the option out. Though Skywalker wouldn't take the option as he leapt into the air after telling Kenobi that he underestimated his power. Anakin was then diced into several pieces as his limbs tumbled into the lava and the main body of Skywalker rolled down the massive embankment. He groaned in pain. Skywalker looked up as Kenobi looked down, holding his hand over his mouth. He couldn't believe what he'd just done. Obi-Wan started yelling down at Anakin, trying to tell him that what he was the chosen one, meant to bring balance to the Force, and all he did was leave it in darkness. Obi-Wan gave his regards to Anakin, telling Skywalker that he loved him, and then Skywalker told him that he hated him. This broke Obi-Wan's heart, more than anything that led up to it could have. This fully cemented that Anakin had died and Vader was born. Obi-Wan looked down and mentally said his goodbye as he picked up Anakin's lightsaber. Obi-Wan looked back down the small embankment. He could go down there and finish it off. He could kill Anakin, but at the same time he looked down and all he saw was a little boy he trained. Obi-Wan couldn't bring himself to do it, so he turned around and abandoned Anakin at the bottom of the lava embankment, caught on fire. Anakin's skin burned and he cried out. Obi-Wan couldn't bear to watch, and so he left Anakin alone to die. Obi-Wan would reconvene with Master Yoda on Pulis Masa. When Obi-Wan got to the small rock planet, he found Master Yoda. The Jedi Grand Master was meditating. He was also talking to the late Qui-Gon Jinn. Bail Organa came up to where he was to inform him of Obi-Wan's arrival. A firm smile crossed Yoda's face before he came to think back of what Obi-Wan had to do. He was more so happy to hear that Obi-Wan survived and beat Vader. He didn't really want to think about what killing Vader would do to Obi-Wan. Yoda got up from his seat and meandered his way down the steps as he looked across at Obi-Wan. His outfit was covered from head to toe in ash and soot. Obi-Wan looked down at Yoda as he asked if it was done. Obi-Wan nodded, and then from the corner of his eyes he saw Padme being laid down on her medical bed. Obi-Wan turned his full attention over to her as Yoda asked what happened. Obi-Wan looked down to his side and explained Anakin's actions. Yoda's heart hurt for Padme. It truly did. He couldn't help but feel responsible for Anakin's actions. Obi-Wan then asked about Sidious, as the Grand Master told the Jedi Master that he had defeated Sidious. Obi-Wan asked what they should do next. Yoda expressed that they needed to find the other Jedi that were lost amongst the stars. Obi-Wan then asked if they would continue to fight. Yoda nodded his head. If the Jedi were to survive, they needed to prove to the people of the galaxy that they were wronged by the Republic. The Sith were dead, Sidious and Anakin both. While Sidious had the pleasantries of a quick death, Anakin withered away in the lava banks of Mustafar. No one came to find him, and he didn't have enough strength to get up the side of the lava banks that he fell down. He just died alone on the lava banks of Mustafar. Obi-Wan and Yoda stood side by side while they watched the medical team prep Padme for birth. Yoda and Obi-Wan looked at each other as well as Bail walked up. He said that reported clone chatter had it that there was a few Jedi Council members that had to survive the Purge. Yoda looked up as the names Oppo Rancice, Coleman Kajak, and Shak Ti came out of Bail's mouth. These Jedi had been reported as missing, unconfirmed kills. Obi-Wan and Yoda were up there too. Obi-Wan then said that Master Eeth Koth was also out there. Yoda bit his lip and looked back to Bail. There was bad blood between the Council and Eeth Koth, considering they forced him out of their order midway through the Clone Wars. If Obi-Wan and Yoda could find these 4 Jedi, though, they could become a formidable force against the Empire. For the Jedi, their enemy was no longer the Sith. Their enemy was the Empire, and while without the Sith, the Jedi had to find a plausible excuse for wanting to stop the Empire. There was a huge block here. The Empire hadn't done anything to make the Jedi feel the need to stop it, though there were feelings towards the Empire that would change. Over the course of the next couple hours, Padme would give birth to 2 children, and she would survive. Without Palpatine taking her life essence and pouring it back into Anakin, she had every reason to survive. Her twins were born and she was perfectly okay. A bit winded, but overall going to survive. Obi-Wan and Yoda had to decide what they would do from here. Obi-Wan admitted that he was rather heartbroken over Skywalker, but he still wanted to help. Yoda and Obi-Wan would discuss what they could do with Bail Organa in stow. Bail admitted that there were a few chances that he and his caucus could stand up to Imperial-like senators, though there was an issue. When a government is weak, there is always an opportunity for someone with strength to take over and utilize the weakness. One of Palpatine's closest friends, Wilhuff Tarkin, would seize power. Being that he was so close to Palpatine, he felt that he could enact the plans that his good friend would have wanted done. So that's what he would do. Tarkin would approach Masa and tell him that he was taking over the Empire, and he would like for him to be by his side during his takeover. Masa knew how close Palpatine and Tarkin were, and respected Tarkin for wanting to continue Palpatine's plans. Tarkin had an entire Imperial arsenal at his disposal, the clone army, which he was about to disband, and the entire pocketbook of the Galactic Empire. He would be able to effectively crown himself as Emperor of the Galaxy, with little to no one saying anything against it. With Palpatine's death under wraps, Tarkin would be able to say it was Palpatine's dying wish to crown him as Emperor. Tarkin would get to work immediately. The Empire was going to be much stricter than the Republic, and he was going to use the clones as a militaristic force, whilst hiring the magnitude of Imperial foot soldiers to become the new face of the Empire. Tarkin also knew that because of the CIS, the Empire would have to go on early campaigns and defeat enemies across the galaxy, enemies of the Republic. The Empire was a threat, where the Republic wasn't. The Empire was militaristically aggressive, while the Republic was passively motivated. When Padme awoke from her little nap, she asked what happened. Obi-Wan just couldn't lie, so he told her exactly what happened, while also hiding the fact that he left Anakin alone to die. Instead of telling her just that he died, he told her that he attacked the high ground and lost. Padme was obviously disappointed in what happened to her husband, but she was also betrayed by him, and she couldn't believe what he had done to her. She still would have believed that there was good within him, but with him being dead, there was no reason for her to believe that there was still good in him. Padme immediately asked Bail what was going on with the Senate. Bail was still receiving intel regarding the Imperial Senate from the basics he understood. He knew that Tarkin was now the Emperor of the Galaxy. Padme questioned if it was the Admiral, and Bail nodded his head. Obi-Wan wasn't exactly happy about this, as he spoke up telling the 2 senators that Tarkin would be much more cruel as an emperor than Palpatine would have been. Bail agreed, but he said that the Senate was essentially useless. Senators couldn't oppose the Emperor. They had little to no power to do anything against what he said. Bail also acknowledged that the war-happy senators that supported Palpatine would jump on the opportunity to support the Admiral of the Clone Wars, especially an Admiral that didn't like the Jedi. Bail told Padme that if they wanted a chance at recovering democracy, something would have to be done about this empire. There was no way democracy would recover if this empire held power for too long, and currently the empire was reigning. People in the Senate seemed to have no issue with an emperor. Padme then turned around and looked in the medical room to see her 2 children. She now had a great responsibility, one that in her mind equaled her responsibility to the people of the Republic, or now the Empire. She knew that she didn't have to worry about the Sith trying to capture them, but she did need to keep them taken care of while she was trying to bring the Republic back together. She looked at Obi-Wan, who was standing in the circle, waiting for the next person to speak. Padme's thoughts immediately made her think of having a babysitter and Obi-Wan would be good. She knew that Obi-Wan would love her children like they were his own, because in a way, he was the closest family to them than anyone else could have ever been. She just didn't know what Obi-Wan would be doing. Would he be going out to the galaxy, or would he be trying to go into hiding? Padme asked Obi-Wan to speak to him alone as the 2 of them stepped aside, and Padme asked him what he would be doing regarding being a Jedi. Obi-Wan paused for a moment, and then he admitted that he was going to do whatever Yoda was going to do, which at this point was leading towards a possible Jedi rebellion. Padme understood as she asked Obi-Wan if he would ever be able to help her, or be available to help her with Luke and Leia. Obi-Wan smiled and told her that he would always be there for her when she needed him. Padme was obviously understanding of Obi-Wan's decision, but she was incredibly thankful that Obi-Wan would be willing to help her out. Regardless, the next several hours would have Bail Organa dropping off Obi-Wan and Yoda on the neutral world of Shili, where the 2 Jedi would search for a Jedi Master who could possibly be here. As for the two senators, they would take themselves back to Coruscant, where Padme, Bail, and Mon Mothma would gather together in Padme's residence to talk about what they could do to take the fight back against the Empire. If they could stop the Empire from holding up an emperor, then they were one step closer to democracy for everyone. That was their main goal, to find the Republic in chaos. For their Jedi, the main goal was at the moment to find as many Jedi as they could. They were on Shili to find the Togruta Jedi Master, Shaak Ti. There were a lot of rumors about what happened to her, and many weren't true. She was lost during the Battle of Coruscant, but she had survived her encounter with General Grievous. She was last seen inside the Jedi Temple, but there was a good chance that she would survive. She was one of the Order's best after all, and there was no confirmed death of her, or confirmed body of her inside of the temple. The two Jedi walked through the streets of a small village. They found the local population and told them that they were looking for their friends of theirs. The people said that they hadn't seen any of those friends in a while, but they admitted that they would harbor the Jedi for the time being if it made them feel better. Obi-Wan and Yoda looked at one another and decided that they would stay on Shili for a couple of months. There were a couple of Togruta Jedi from the Order, so it was a good idea for the two of them to stay on Shili. It was a nice planet that wouldn't see the Empire near it for several months to several years. Obi-Wan and Yoda set up camp here at the Shili, and Obi-Wan and Yoda would, from time to time, leave the planet to try and find other Jedi. Their attempts failed, though Obi-Wan would have the opportunity to come back to Coruscant and babysit Luke and Leia for a short little bit. When Obi-Wan returned to Shili, he would find Yoda with two Jedi. These two Jedi made their way to Shili without any other reason to do so than it was their homeworld. When Obi-Wan got here, he found Shaak Ti and Ahsoka Tano talking to Master Yoda. Both Jedi were extremely excited to see Obi-Wan after a couple months since the fall of the Republic. Ahsoka had some things to talk to Obi-Wan about, after Yoda told Ahsoka about Anakin. Ahsoka told Obi-Wan that Maul had escaped during the Purge. Obi-Wan placed his hands on her shoulder and told her that all he was concerned about was that she was safe. Ahsoka told Obi-Wan that she came home to find a place of refuge for the time being. She didn't know what to do after her ship slammed down into an uncivilized moon and killed all of her men. But what else could she do, and Rex do, but try and survive? Obi-Wan was understanding of her predicament, as the four Jedi had to come up with what they would do to confront the Empire. Because while the Empire hadn't begun its war crimes yet, the Empire's effect was making its way around the galaxy. Everyone now needed cards to travel between systems. Clone troopers who used to protect the citizens of the worlds they were stationed on began to enforce curfews and lockdowns on citizens for no reason. Tarkin's Empire would by default be crueler than the Empire that Sidious would have ran. Tarkin also put fear into the hearts of every senator, especially those with differing views, because of the emphasis on power that he had. Tarkin made a list of every senator that had an agenda against Sidious's plan, and he sent shock troopers to consistently monitor their movements, their meetings, and everything else that they did. These shock troopers made sure that their presence was noticed, as they continuously showed up when the senators didn't want them around. It created tension between these senators and the Empire, because the senators weren't allowed to freely discuss, though this is how it had to be under an autocracy. Tarkin also implemented harsher sanctions against the Jedi, and he did this by outlawing wearing hoods. As ridiculous as it sounded, he ensured that every street corner had images of Jedi on them. There were about close to 500 survivors of the Purge, and Tarkin worked hard to ensure that the clones went through the Jedi Temple and every single area of the Purge to find which Jedi had been killed, and create a list of the Jedi who hadn't. There were of course some Jedi on the list that had been executed by the clones, but for the most part the list was almost entirely accurate. Bounty hunters had a list of Jedi to hunt, and the clones were consistently checking individuals. It was terror for the Jedi, and most of the Senate was in favor of this treatment of the Jedi Order. For the four Jedi on Shili, they were trying to decide what to do to help out the remaining members. Obi-Wan's final message to the Order had Padawans and younglings running into the galaxy, hiding away. It wasn't intentional. He wanted everyone to stay safe, because he didn't know if he would beat Anakin or if Yoda would beat Sidious. And because they both did, he couldn't give a message back out to them saying where to go. Regardless, Obi-Wan was heading back to Coruscant. He had planned on going back at this particular time because that's what he and Padme arranged. Though because of Tarkin's recent change to the rules and wiretapping into opposing senators' communications, Padme couldn't tell Obi-Wan about the dangers of coming back to Coruscant. Obi-Wan felt that there was something wrong, but he also believed that he needed to do it. There was something in the Force telling him to do this, regardless of the danger that he could be put into for doing it. Obi-Wan made sure that Ahsoka came with him, in case something bad happened. He could have backup. Obi-Wan, before leaving, would ask Master Yoda if there was anything he could do while he was on Coruscant to aid the cause. Yoda suggested that Obi-Wan send another message out to the Jedi about rebuilding. Obi-Wan thought this was a good idea, but was curious if such implications could endanger the Jedi Order. Yoda believed that Obi-Wan should do what he believed was the right decision in the situation. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka would depart from Chile. At the same time, Shakti and Yoda would leave the planet and go out to the Mid-Rim. There was a lot of Jedi with Padawans sent to the Mid-Rim at the end of the war. The Mid-Rim saw the calmest combat, and there were several patrols out in the area that might have surviving Padawans from the Purge. It was a great place to start, especially since there were still young, surviving Padawans of the Order out somewhere in the galaxy. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka would arrive on Coruscant. Ahsoka would lay low throughout the city. She would follow the Hood Law, but she was essentially safe. When the Purge happened, she was considered a citizen, and even more than that, those who knew she returned to the Republic to aid the military operations on Mandalore knew that her vessel, returning to Coruscant, stopped transmitting its location after being ripped out of hyperspace. So very few people would recognize Ahsoka, those being members of the 501st, 212th, Admiral Yularen, or Admiral Tarkin, or Emperor Tarkin at this point, to the will of the Empire, and both of the 501st and 212th were currently off-world, subjecting still loyal Separatist planets to the will of the Empire. Ahsoka was safe if she avoided Imperial complexes. When Obi-Wan entered Padme's house, he felt an eerie silence. It was uncommon for the residents to be so quiet. Luke and Leia were not quiet by any means. They were when they were sleeping, but the feeling was still eerie. Obi-Wan placed his hand over his lightsaber as he tiptoed around the residence as he heard voices from a separate room. They were very distinct clone voices. Obi-Wan still had compassion for the clones and he didn't want to kill them, despite what they had done to the Jedi Temple. Even what Yoda and him did at the Jedi Temple, they didn't want to slaughter the 501st, but they had no other options. There wasn't anything to get the clones away from the temple, and they were acting in self-defense by what they did. Regardless, Obi-Wan looked around the corner and saw two shock troopers with their blasters at Padme's face. They'd been sent by Tarkin. Obi-Wan pulled out his hologram. His initial reaction was to fight, but they weren't talking about Jedi. The clones were talking about politics of the Empire. Obi-Wan knew that if he played this right, it could be an effective use of his time here. The hologram picked up everything the clones said, as it showed them holding their blasters towards Senator Padme Amidala. Obi-Wan's resilience for not jumping into combat was incredible. He wanted to very badly, but he couldn't. This could be the right recording to sway the Senate and the Empire back towards democracy, because while the war-happy politicians liked their power, if they could be threatened so easily, then maybe they'd be willing to unite to remove Tarkin from power and still go towards a militaristic regime. The clones continued talking like robots, as if they were reading from a teleprompter. They told Padme that she needed to support the next bill proposed by Tarkin to show a strong resolve in the Imperial Senate, because it was being broadcasted galaxy-wide. Padme asked what would happen if she didn't support the bill. Her and her constituents didn't believe in. The clone spoke back, telling her that one of her children would be taken from her with lethal force, as by orders of the Emperor. Padme admitted that this was threatening of a public servant, as the clone shoved her against the wall and told her that she was just as easily replaceable as any citizen. The clones started out of the room as Obi-Wan pulled the hologram and hid behind some furniture. The clones made their way out of the residence. Obi-Wan moved into the room where Padme was. She had tears in her eyes as Obi-Wan rushed to her aid. Padme was so enthralled to see Obi-Wan that she wrapped her arms around him. He did the same to her as he told her that everything would be okay. He got it all recorded. Padme jumped back as she asked what Obi-Wan just said. Obi-Wan showed her device and played back the entirety of what he'd recorded. Padme was extremely happy, but she told Obi-Wan that if she was going to take this to the Senate, then he would need to take the children away from Coruscant. Padme also expressed that she would need help. Chances were that the Empire would have her executed for treason, but it was already well established that citizens of the Empire were not happy with the new systems implemented against intergalactic travel. Padme knew she could use the unpopularity of Tarkin against him. Unlike Palpatine, who was a proper politician, Tarkin had no political experience at this point. He was just an admiral that knew what Palpatine wanted. He didn't know that Palpatine was going to slowly implement these tactics to ensure security for the Empire. The slow implementation would have forced citizens to accommodate to changes without rapidly having their worlds flipped upside down by imperial martial law. Tarkin was far from brilliant as a politician, so this would work in favor of the Jedi and the Senator Rebellion, because Tarkin implemented everything Palpatine was going to do for the next 10 years in the first 5 or so months. Padme told Obi-Wan that he needed to go immediately. He shook his head as he told her that Ahsoka would go to where the children were and take the children with her. Padme looked at Obi-Wan a little cross-eyed. Obi-Wan expressed that Ahsoka was on Coruscant in case he needed assistance, and it seemed like there was a perfect reason for her to come with him to Coruscant. Padme smiled. She wouldn't rather have anyone other than Ahsoka and Obi-Wan with her children. Within a number of minutes, Ahsoka would be at the residence to take Luke and Leia back to Chile for the time being. Yoda and shocked he would be made aware of what Kenobi was doing. Before Ahsoka, Luke, and Leia split away from Obi-Wan and Padme. While they were on their way to the Senate building, Padme would inform her coalition of what had happened. She would reach out to them and prepare an argumentative statement, telling all of them to do the same. Tarkin was preparing to win in a landslide vote on his new bill. What he did not know is that Padme was coming to ruin all that of what he wanted to do in Palpatine's honor. This new bill would have had much stricter sanctions on citizens and more citizen arrests being popular. When Padme got to the Senate building, her and Obi-Wan split up. Obi-Wan was going to use the ventilation shafts and hidden corridors throughout the Senate building to get to her office. Padme was going to her office to talk with top-ranked members of her coalition about their plan. It would take the course of several hours to accomplish everything. The best part about a Tarkin Empire is he broadcasted everything to the galaxy. He wanted the galaxy to see how united the Senate was. If Padme's plans went according to plan, then it would all come crashing down on Tarkin during this session. The session was delayed a bit because of a riot outside the Senate building. Most of the people were not enthralled about harder sanctions against them. But when the shock troopers put a quiet end to the riot, the session of Senate would begin. Tarkin would hold the floor and discuss everything within the bill and why the Senate was going to quote-unquote vote it into existence. Essentially, it was a bunch of lies to convince the public that the bill would be beneficial when it really wasn't. Tarkin was then going to open up the floor to discussion for those that opposed the bill. During a few hours before the session, delayed by the riots, Bail Organa was able to group up some of the middle ground senators that were more so independent than militaristic and turn them against Tarkin. Padme would allow every senator before her to confront the Emperor and discuss why or how the bill wasn't going to work for the citizens of the Empire. Tarkin was very upset by this and pressed a button on his pod that would alert Commander Fox to prepare a group of shock troopers at every opposing senator's exit for arrest. Obi-Wan, who was in the halls, watched as shock troopers filled the halls outside of the senators' pods. He had plenty of time. While the senators had a few hours to compile their arguments, those in the middle had their reasons already for being neutral, and the additional motivation to go against the bill would help dissuade the public. Tarkin, while having Fox on the move, didn't have the ability to cut off communications from transmitting the sessions across the galaxy. He didn't actually anticipate on this many senators going against the bill. As the shock troopers lined up against each senator's pods, Obi-Wan would move in like a ghost by taking down each of the guards without igniting his lightsaber, and using a very uncivilized mode of combat. After taking down the first clone trooper duo, he would take their blasters and set them for stun. It would keep his actions quiet, while he gave the senators a chance to escape. After each pair of clones were stunned, Obi-Wan would place their 2 clones in binds, so that they couldn't harm any of the senators, nor could they escape. For about 2 hours, the senators would defile the bill proposed by Tarkin, each senator getting more and more personal with their attacks against the Emperor, until it got down to Padme. It was very obviously building. The tension in the room was heading towards this moment, and when Padme unveiled how she was threatened, the hologram played galaxy-wide, where clone troopers told a senator that public servants and citizens were expendable, essentially easily replaceable. The outrage poured out as Coruscant, Mid-Rim worlds, and other less loyal Imperial worlds would break out into riots. Tarkin's empire was beginning to show its weakness, and this was because of Tarkin's poor leadership over the Empire. As Tarkin prepared to end the Senate session, the building would crash. The sound of an explosion sent the Senate chambers into darkness. Obi-Wan, who was finishing up imprisoning of the clone troopers, turned to the sound of the explosion. Kenobi knew it was happening as he bailed away from the situation as crowds pushed through the clone trooper lines. There was bloodshed, but the overwhelming number of citizens around running through the Senate halls was too much for the clones. The ruckus could be heard from the Senate chambers, where the Senate was still discussing. The Senate began to notice the group of citizens surrounding them. The halls filled with citizens as Tarkin realized what was happening. Tarkin abandoned the Senate chambers as his pod lowered down into his private office. The rioters weren't here for the senators, they were here for the Emperor. If the Emperor controlled the clone army, then he must be stopped. The rioters dispersed as they went to find the Emperor. It wouldn't take long before several protesters made their way to the Emperor's underground office and tore through his personal guard and him. For the senators, most of them would be able to escape, though some of the more loyal senators to the Emperor wouldn't be so lucky. Padme was able to escape, and for the coming few months, the Empire would grind to a complete halt. Of course, the clone legions would continue their war effort against former separatist worlds, mostly against droid armies, though in the Imperial Senate, because of Tarkin's aggressive behavior in the few weeks and months of office, he would cause the downfall of the Empire. The Jedi would still be outlawed, and that wouldn't change for several years, but because of the downfall of the Empire and the Emperor, the Senate would be able to reform into a democracy. Mon Mothma would be elected as a moderate chancellor to hold the newly formed democracy together. Considering most of the last 13 years, the leader of the Republic was essentially a dictator who won elections, the Republic would reform, in a way. Though with the Sith gone and their evil tyranny of the Empire tarnished forever, the Jedi would be able to rebuild, away from the restored Republic. As for Padme and her and Obi-Wan would become closer and closer. Nothing romantic by any means, but Obi-Wan would become a father figure that Luke and Leia needed. Obi-Wan would continue to serve the Jedi, but he wanted to help Padme and his former student's family. There was also an issue. Maul and his criminal empire still existed, but with the United Republic front, the clone army would be sent out to destroy it. Obi-Wan also had no issue traveling to Coruscant, because the Jedi were no longer executed on sight. They were just not permitted to be in the public eye for so long. They were allowed to be allowed in public and stuff like that, but they just weren't allowed to be public officials. Because of the brave actions of the few, the galaxy was able to find success and peace without autocracy or the reign of the Sith. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Icy Raptor, Anakin003, and Gore for supporting the channel. Let's see thoughts and likes. We're going to have part 2 of What If Plo Left the Order with Ahsoka tomorrow. So let me know what you want to see down below. If you read all my comments, I read all the comments on adult crossovers. Check out the Twitch community Discord and Patreon if you want to support the community or me in other ways. And if you don't know how to win a free lightsaber, so subscribe. Go down below. There's a link. Click on the link and you write your name down below. I will announce giveaway winners when we hit 50,000 subscribers inside of a video. I'll announce winners inside of videos. And let's talk about our story. Our story is, well, interesting. Now, I know I stay different from other Star Wars YouTubers because this obviously could have just been a 20-minute video of what if Palpatine lost the battle, but I don't like doing that. There's always something more that can happen, and with these Revenge of the Sith videos, it's hard because Revenge of the Sith is a very strict timeline, and it's a very strict ending, so depending on what I do, I have to change it up according to that. So with this one, essentially, Palpatine doesn't get the chance to go back and save Anakin, and Anakin just dies alone, which is really kind of sad, honestly. It's a really tragic death, but he would just die alone. There's nothing that can be done for him. He would just die. Like, he doesn't have anywhere to go. So it's kind of really tragic for Anakin. He just burns alive, and then he like has an asthma attack or something when he's like trying to climb up the thing with his one arm, which, you know, is all too relatable for those of us with asthma who want to climb up mountains and have asthma attacks while being burnt alive and only having one arm. Very relatable situation for those of us with asthma. But all jokes aside, the tragedy of Anakin is highlighted in this story. Now, I think the story is more of a political soap opera at the end, and I think that's more so intended. I think Tarkin would have taken over, or Masa, but none of them had the whether it's political, whether it's Masa or Tarkin, or even another representative or Imperial, I don't think they would have the same political savvy as Palpatine. Now, we have to remember, Palpatine was really smart as a politician, and that's something I wanted to highlight here. Now, this wasn't an attack on Tarkin or anything like this. This was actually a compliment to Palpatine. This was very much so a compliment to his strategy and his brilliance as a politician, because he knew how to, especially, control the public while he was retrofitting an empire into a completely controlled estate, or a controlled state that he had under his control. Okay? If Tarkin had the same plans, he wouldn't have enacted it as brilliantly. Now, would he be so blatantly stupid to do it in the first couple weeks and months? Yes, no, maybe so. You don't really know with Tarkin. He's kind of unhinged, and we see that throughout all of his story. He's just an unhinged individual. And I think that unhinged layer of Tarkin would have led to him failing the Empire, and the Empire kind of seeing an issue with itself. Now, core worlds, as seen in the Andor video that I did the other day, shameless plug, the core worlds were specifically loyal, and that's not just me writing it in. It's a very fact of Star Wars, is that core worlds were specifically loyal to either the Republic, the Empire, or the New Republic. That's just how they were, because they were core worlds, and most of the politicians came from those core worlds, and most of the higher class society lived in those core worlds, so they liked that particular set of government. So for me to say that Coruscant and other core worlds were disliking the Emperor goes to show the length of what I'm trying to portray here. Is that if the most loyal worlds in the galaxy are kind of like, yo, this is not cool, then you know that your leader is not a good leader. And that's kind of what I wanted to go with here. Is I wanted to show the brilliance of Palpatine and really show and depict how great of a politician he was and how that worked for so long, because he became Chancellor 13 years before he became Emperor. That means he won at least 2 elections, if not 3 or 4, depending on how long the length of Chancellor is in Star Wars or in the Galactic Republic. So he continuously won campaigns, and he kept in power, right? He kept in power for a long time, and there was a reason for that, and that's what I wanted to highlight in this video. And while there was the focus of the Jedi Rebellion and all that stuff, and rioters taking down shock troopers and stuff like that, I wanted the focus of the story to be kind of more so as a political soap opera at the end, because that's really what's going to happen. If there's no senator, if there's no Palpatine, it's becoming political. It has to become political. Obviously, the Jedi can do their thing, and that could have gone more into detail with the Jedi Rebellion, but there's not much the Jedi could do other than what they did. The main change that happens in the storyline after the Sith are extinguished, other than the exception of Maul, who goes and does his little Crimson Dawn thing, which doesn't affect the politics of the galaxy, the main change that happens here is essentially political, because Palpatine is the Emperor and he controls the government, and whoever fills that role for him is probably not going to do it as well as he did. That's just a guarantee. They're not going to do it as well as he did. Whether it's Masa made it, whether it's the Umbaran, whether it's Tarkin, it doesn't matter who they are. They're not going to play it as brilliantly as Palpatine did. And it's a true testament what this video is towards Palpatine, as Palpatine is a brilliant politician who knew how to manipulate politics in his favor. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.